Hi, I'm Dr. Susan Collins, and I'm Chief Investigator of the Fostering Lifelong Connections for Children in Permanent Care study, funded by the Australian Research Council. And I'll be sharing some practice learnings and some resources developed through the study with you, specifically focused around supporting co-regulation. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on unceded Aboriginal land and to pay respects to the tradition of custodianship and law of country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand, and to acknowledge those who have and continue to care for country. So what is co-regulation and why is it important for thinking about family time practice? We know that contact with birth family can potentially reactivate children's trauma, and that when children are distressed, children with a trauma history, they will revert to trauma responses that are familiar to them. And we know these as being fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the four main trauma states. Co-regulation is the way that adults can themselves model a calm state and use strategies to bring a child back into their own calm state of regulation. So that is what co-regulation is about. Caseworkers are also part of this process because they can indeed assist the adults around a child, particularly their caregivers, to reflect on and understand their own emotions, as well as their own trauma experiences and expressions, so that they are then able to and equipped to respond sensitively to children before, during, and after family time. I'm going to present a study of Neville and Grace to sort of illustrate how this can work. So Neville and Grace are new carers. They have two siblings in their care, and they've been distressed about the high levels of emotional dysregulation they've seen in the children before and after seeing parents, family time with parents. And they've been asking the caseworker for explanations for this behaviour. What happened before they came into care, and should they indeed suspend family time as a strategy to address this emotional dysregulation? And what can the caseworker do? What we have here is an excellent example of casework support. So the caseworker here validated Neville and Grace's emotions, told them it's normal to feel upset when you see the children you're caring for so distressed, but also reminding the carers that children sense their carers' distress and they then respond to that distress. So that's also a contributing factor for their own behaviour. So caseworkers suggesting that perhaps the children are struggling around regulating their emotions, and that maybe they could help them with this by focusing on the present, not looking to the past for explanations, but being in the moment. So the caseworker invited the carers to reflect on their own feelings, their own emotions around the children seeing their parents, and that recognising these feelings could help them understand that their distress was impacting on the children, and that if they were calmer, if they were able to use strategies to return to a calm state themselves, they could then model this for the children. Some of the suggestions that were used by this caseworker were appropriate to this family. So the carers did some gardening, got their hands in the dirt, and they did some bubble blowing. Based on the children's ages, that was a solution for the children to help them return to a calm state by getting their breathing back under control, and also doing something fun and connected between the carers and the children. So what did we learn and how did we do it? We had two teams of caseworkers, our action researchers, trialling this co-regulation practice for a period of about 8 months. And what they did was study and then learn from that. They plan the to do co-regulation and what that would involve. And then they studied what was happening and reflected and then adapted based on what they learned. And so the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle was completed around this practice. What we learned was that caseworkers need to recognise the trauma histories and stress they were under and also the carers were under to validate them. This was the first step in being able to support them, those carers, to be able to co-regulate with children. And what we saw was that acknowledgement created a space for carers to feel trust, to feel they were heard, and that they weren't being told they were wrong, they weren't being ignored, and their issues and their distress wasn't being minimised. That then allowed them to create this space to talk about emotional states with carers, and through that process then build some trust between them, so that the strategies they were offering could be applied and the carer could discuss how they were going, but there was a willingness to try something new. And then this process of constantly revisiting and validating went on. We know that the opposite of co-regulation is indeed co-escalation, and this is a major driver of caseworker burnout. So caseworkers actually internalise that stress themselves. It also doesn't reduce children's trauma expressions, it actually increases it when they don't have a safe relational adult to model calm states against, and it can jeopardise placement stability. So this is really important stuff. It's about encouraging carers to be aware of their own emotions and reactions, exploring what part their own history is having in that, and then normalising and validating the challenges they're experiencing, not denying them. And so when there are strategies used, taking time to think about and regroup afterwards and become grounded, and this creates the opportunity for co-regulation, which is about relational. We're talking about relational richness. We're talking about building that trust and safety. And this is the foundations that are needed for healing and repair, which is the essence of what all good trauma-informed practice is about. So again, we realised that what we learned was that co-regulation by the caseworker can create a holding environment for the carer, so they can provide that holding environment for the child. We saw a parallel process. I've talked a bit about this awareness raising with carers around their own emotional states, thinking about their own histories with trauma, perhaps other children, perhaps their own, and then helping them manage and repairing their relationships with their children, but also in parallel, caseworkers bringing awareness of their own reactions, their own emotional states, so that they can be that safe space for the carer. Reframing children's behaviour, importantly, offering carers other ways to think about the behaviour they're seeing, normalising and validating those challenges, so that they can support this process and create that holding environment for children. So some of the resources I wanted to share, one is called the Trauma Expression and Connection Assessment, or the TECA. It's a relational assessment, and really what we're talking about here when we say assessment is really a self-assessment or an assessment by the carer of the child in their care, but it could be the carer assessing themselves. It may be really useful for you to take a look at the TECA yourself. It is based around the 4 trauma responses, the 4 states of fight, flight, freeze and fawn, and looking at what might be going on in those states and what might be some helpful strategies for bringing somebody in one of those particular states back to a calm place, back to a state where they can be more regulated. And this is that repair work. This is what work that's done not individually, it's done with and for alongside those children. So that can really be a foundational conversation starter that caseworkers can have with carers as an introduction to building some trauma awareness in them. We also then developed some visuals that go with this. This is sort of a version of the TECA that can be shared with carers. It again has, on the right-hand side, you'll see some practical examples of strategies carers can recommend that are used with children when they are in that distressed state or in a state of where a carer thinks their child might be in, or to avoid them entering that trauma state. So in both cases, they can be really sort of safe, calming, connected. They're very much about connecting the carer and the child, connecting adults and the child. And these can also be really helpful for being used as part of family time, so they can be introduced to parents. But you can see on the left-hand side also that using the traffic lights from green through yellow and amber to red, looking at where a child is at. So trying to get that awareness for carers around anticipating when a child is no longer in a calm state. We've also developed a series of tip sheets called Words Matter, and these are about understanding that children's trauma behaviours happen because children do not have the language, the words to describe their distress, and that when we label those behaviours negatively with negatively charged language, that's blaming the child, and the child then internalises, the child and young person internalises those labels about themselves. So we designed a series of tip sheets that look at some of those negatively charged words and try to offer some other ways to think about what might be going on in the moment for that child, what traumatic memory might be reactivated in that moment that they might be then reacting to, and what might be some other ways to describe more positively, in a more trauma-informed way, what that child is experiencing and what they need in that moment. We also developed a tip sheet for carers and caseworkers that offers some really practical tips for making family time rewarding, a rich and rewarding part of children's lives. And it promotes that same sort of messages around using body-based activities and using these activities that are connecting. They're both, they're about relationship repair. We also worked with an expert reference group that included 2 mothers with experience of having children in care, Chantel Rossi and Tegan Whitaker, and with them we developed a series of tip sheets that were designed for parents to around family time, but are also really useful for other adults. And we encourage caseworkers to look at these too, developed and co-designed by these mothers with lived experience who felt that the first step was shining some light into the darkness as a way of starting the healing journey for parents. And this was about them understanding, again, using that traffic light from what state they were therein around the upcoming family time with the child, and what it might mean, what this might look like for them, and then thinking about what they can do in order to take some active steps to be on that healing journey so that they are actually able to be really present and a really positive resource for their child, and that family time is rewarding for both of them, and that it's part of the relational repair work they're doing. So there's some really great tips in there for parents. There's 2 other tip sheets that are all about the sparks of connection and how to strengthen and nourish these. And they're really about attunement to what the child needs. And so they're bringing parents into the frame. So thinking of parents as a resource for their child's stability and well-being, and helping parents understand what they might not see but what carers, caseworkers and children might be experiencing the lead up to family time. So it's about questioning and probing and thinking about how to be a positive resource and working, the team of adults working together. So that's the other part of this relationship building, is bringing parents in. They often feel left out of understanding what is going on for their child. And so trying to bring those connection points and for them to be a resource themselves. So what we would encourage you to do now as part of your self-guided learning is to download those Words Matter tip sheets. Look at them, look at the negatively charged words and reflect on a time that you may have heard or even used one of these words to describe a child. Think about what might have been happening for that child or young person at the time, and what other language might have been more constructive for thinking about what they need in order to feel safe again. So please do download those resources, have a play, try them, share them with others, and you can reach out to us at any time on our email address. Please do visit that website where you'll find all this and many, many more of those resources. So thanks for joining me